Carl Jung once said, "Show me a madman, and I'll show you someone who has faced the entirety of their soul." Madness, or what we commonly label as such, often terrifies us. In our society, losing sanity is something we try to avoid at all cost. We're afraid of being labeled, judged, or of losing control over our own minds. But could this phenomenon, commonly called madness, reveal something deeper about us? To Jung, madness wasn't just a mental disorder. It was an expression of the soul, a cry from the unconscious, seeking understanding and integration. What we label as insanity is often the manifestation of parts of the psyche that have been repressed and ignored for too long. The madman, in his agony, confronts internal content most of us avoid, faces aspects of the collective unconscious, archetypes, and forces dwelling in the depths of the human psyche. In this sense, the madman paradoxically becomes a figure of wisdom, a warning from the unconscious urging us to face what we've suppressed. In various cultures, the madman or the wise fool is seen as someone with access to hidden truths, challenging conventional logic and the rigid boundaries set by rationality. Yet understanding this reality is challenging and often painful, especially in a society that values control, rationality, and emotional detachment. Exploring the psychology of the madman forces us to confront a profound and unsettling theme: the relationship between sanity and psychic freedom. What does it really mean to lose one's mind? Are we merely being overtaken by an irrational force, or is it the unconscious crying out for a place in our lives? According to Jung, the process of individuation, the journey toward a full and authentic life, requires not only accepting, but also integrating parts of the psyche we tend to marginalize or deem undesirable. In this video, we'll explore how madness can be viewed as a call from the soul, an invitation to individuation. We'll examine what insanity reveals about what we hide, what frightens us, and what, perhaps, could set us free. Jung invites us to view madness with new eyes, seeking to understand what it truly has to teach us about the vast landscape of the human psyche. For Jung, madness results from a deep psychic process that occurs when an individual can no longer maintain the rigid structure of their conscious psyche. This often happens when intense unconscious material surfaces with such force that it destabilizes the conscious mind. Jung observed that, in this state, the unconscious no longer lingers on the sidelines of rational control, but instead takes over the psyche entirely, bringing forth elements the conscious mind isn't prepared to face. A core concept in Jungian psychology is the idea that each of us has a dark side, a shadow composed of everything we reject or deny about ourselves. The madman is often someone who found it impossible to keep repressing the shadow. The figures that appear in their visions and hallucinations are personifications of repressed parts of the psyche that, after being ignored for so long, emerge uncontrollably. Rather than being mere symptoms of disorder, these visions can be attempts by the unconscious to communicate something essential about the individual's personal journey. The experience of fragmentation, typical of states of madness, is an expression of what Jung called psychic dissociation. Simply put, it's as if the psyche splits into several independent and often conflicting parts. Paradoxically, this phenomenon reflects the unconscious's desire to integrate and harmonize the psyche. When the ego tries to exert too much control and repress these parts, the built-up pressure can explode, resulting in crises that seem bewildering but are, in reality, a cry for help from the unconscious. Jung viewed psychoses as an avalanche of unconscious material that the ego can no longer contain. The rational mind, unable to grasp the depth and complexity of this process, tends to label it as pathological, something that needs to be fixed or silenced. However, Jung believed that these moments of crisis offer a unique opportunity for personal growth and transformation if approached with understanding and compassion. To him, what we often see as a destructive manifestation of the unconscious is, in fact, an attempt by the soul to communicate and restore itself. Madness thus becomes less a simple mental error and more a potentially healing, albeit painful, process of reconciling with oneself. To understand the psychology of madness from a Jungian perspective, it's helpful to see how everyday life situations can lead people to a state of psychic rupture. Imagine, for example, a person who grew up in an environment where showing emotions was seen as a sign of weakness. This person learns to suppress any sign of vulnerability, disconnecting from their deepest emotions to meet expectations of strength and rationality. Over time, the repressed emotional content begins to build pressure in the unconscious, manifesting in unexpected ways: anxiety, episodes of disproportionate anger, or even behaviors beyond rational control. A classic example in literature is Shakespeare's Hamlet, where the protagonist is driven to madness after his father's death and the revelation of family betrayals. Intense suffering and a lack of psychological support lead him on a journey of ego deconstruction. Hamlet's crisis symbolizes the inner conflict of someone who, under the weight of pain, begins to lose control over their conscious mind. This collapse is not merely a psychic failure, but a reflection of an unconscious search for answers and for reintegration. In real life, we see similar patterns in people who undergo traumatic events and develop dissociative disorders, like depersonalization or the splitting of parts of identity. This occurs in individuals who, to shield themselves from traumatic memories, create an internal split, isolating the traumatic experience within a separate part of the psyche. These behaviors, often viewed as symptoms of madness, actually show the complexity of how the human mind tries to cope with overwhelming pain. Madness, in this sense, becomes an extreme defense mechanism. These examples illustrate how apparent insanity can be a response to the soul's need to manage unbearable psychic realities rather than a mere mental error. Jung believed that, in many cases, helping these individuals understand the nature of the unconscious content surfacing is the first step toward healing. Therapeutic work then consists of reconnecting these dissociated aspects with the conscious personality, allowing the ego to become more flexible and able to engage with repressed parts. Jung saw the path of accepting and integrating repressed parts as a heroic journey. In practice, this journey demands the courage to confront one's inner demons, including deep fears, traumas, and aspects of one's personality that have long been denied. The process of individuation involves precisely this reconciliation between consciousness and the unconscious. For the madman, this journey can feel like an emotional roller coaster of unsettling visions. But if approached with patience and proper support, it can offer profound healing. Archetypes are key elements here, as they represent universal, timeless forces existing in each of our psyches. In madness, these archetypes often emerge with intensity, overtaking consciousness. Jung observed, for instance, that certain patients in psychological crises might experience visions or hallucinations of archetypal figures like the wise old man or the terrible mother. These figures aren't just mental constructions. They are expressions of themes rooted in the collective unconscious, touching on the very core of human existence. For those experiencing them, the emotional impact is devastating, as they're forced to confront images and emotions of a depth rarely encountered by consciousness. In the experience of madness, the archetype of the hero is also present, but in a challenging form. Anyone facing their own madness is, in a sense, an archetypal hero, venturing into the unknown of their psyche, confronting overwhelming fears and struggling to regain balance. Jung suggested that, when understood correctly, the psychotic experience could be a dark yet fundamentally similar version of the hero's journey. In this journey, the ego must confront the shadow and ultimately reintegrate the fragmented parts of the psyche. Though painful, encounters with the shadow and with archetypes can restore lost balance, bringing a sense of inner unity and peace. In this journey, the therapist acts as a guide, helping the individual find meaning and context for their mad experiences. By validating the suffering and interpreting the emerging content symbolically, the therapist facilitates reintegration and individuation. Madness then reveals itself as the soul's attempt to reorganize and find meaning amidst chaos. It's a radical way for the unconscious to call for transformation, insisting on being heard, recognized, and ultimately integrated. Viewed through Jung's lens, madness invites us to a transformative reflection. What if this often feared and stigmatized experience is actually a profound call from the psyche for reconciliation and renewal? Rather than a mere mental breakdown, madness represents the peak of internal tensions needing expression and often healing. Perhaps it reveals the soul's thirst for wholeness, for a life embracing both light and shadow. The path to individuation requires radical honesty with oneself. Insanity, in the Jungian context, can be seen as the soul's cry to accept the full truth of who we are. If there's something we can learn from the psychology of madness, it's that the psyche won't tolerate living in denial indefinitely. Repressed parts of the soul always find a way to surface, whether through symptoms, crises, or even in the emergence of a madness that challenges the ego to open itself to the unknown. Jung said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." Facing one's own madness can be the first step in that awakening. Someone undergoing a mental breakdown faces the task of restructuring their identity, integrating what once seemed unacceptable or unknown. This process, though arduous and painful, can lead to greater psychic freedom and deeper self-understanding. Accepting what surfaces in our own madness is often the path to discovering that we can endure, understand, and transform what once seemed unbearable. In today's society, which so values logic and control, learning to listen to what the unconscious seeks to communicate becomes essential. The psychology of madness thus teaches us the importance of openness to the soul, of courage to hear what consciousness avoids, and of sensitivity to recognize that our psyche is a vast and profound mystery. Rather than stigmatizing madness, Jung invites us to view it as an experience that, with proper support, can become a path to healing and growth. We conclude, then, with the idea that, on our journey toward individuation, perhaps each of us faces, to some degree, our own version of madness. Accepting and understanding these moments connects us with our entire being, opening the door to a more authentic and fulfilling life. Jung leaves us with this lesson. At the center of chaos lies the seed of healing and unity, a path to finding peace within ourselves at last.